Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Love Fruit podcast. And today, my guest is Kelsey Card, who is on Instagram as at Rosie Heals. If you want to go and follow her there and find out some more about her, and I'm sure that a lot of you do follow her there. She's got a big and growing following, sharing about her healing journey using raw vegan foods and um, maybe other things that we'll learn about and hear more about, and shares a lot of inspiring stuff about her own journey to better health. So, Rosie, thank you for joining us today. And is there anything else you would, sorry, Kelsey, sorry, but I'm getting confused already. Is there anything else you want to say? And then, or would you like to introduce yourself a little bit or say anything more about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, thank you for having me on. I love the podcast. I think it's a jewel of the community, so I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
I yeah. Um, I could start by clearing up the Rosie Kelsey name thing if you want. So I started my Instagram account in 2015 or 16 in response to coming down with the chronic illness issues and kind of first beginning to navigate healing around that. The issues that I had were mast cell activation syndrome or histamine intolerance, and I had dysautonomia issues, which I think were definitely linked to POTS, but I was never diagnosed with anything like that. I always wanted testing for it, but didn't stick around long enough to get that.
Sorry,
And I also,
you had all
yeah,
these different things. Are these common to have together, or are they? Um,
they actually really are common to have together.
right.
And sorry if I'm breaking up, Ronnie, let me know. I
Yeah,
don't know
you,
if it's
you
me or
paused
you.
slightly there, but we'll keep going and hopefully it's okay.
Okay. Yeah, there's actually, it's kind of known as a trifecta oftentimes,
Right.
this MCAS, POTS, and EDS cluster. People think it's kind of a genetic cluster, and it's really interesting because I've seen it kind of show up in my family members in different ways, unbeknownst to them. But now that I'm aware of these issues and I can see the way they operate in genes, yes, but I really expressed more and quite suddenly the histamine issues at one point. But actually, it all started with like a near syncope, almost passing out episode in my office one day. And that happened twice very significantly before I moved into this territory of like that episode kind of recurring every day, kind of on a scale.
Mhm.
So that was kind of the POTS stuff I think that I had. And EDS is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a hypermobility connective tissue issue. Um, and a lot of people who have that will present with like subluxing joints that pop out a lot and some other connective issues. And I really think that potentially expressed for me in the gut. Everything really started for me with gut issues, and I can look back and see that that started as early as high school and my
Right.
really young
Were these
life.
were these conditions, are these seen as genetic conditions that there's not really any answer to? Is that how they're put
Yeah,
across?
yeah, they definitely are. And mast cell activation syndrome is pretty new. I mean, MCAS, POTS, and EDS are all very new diseases. And honestly, most people who are presenting with these issues will go to their doctor and be much more expert level on the topic. Many doctors haven't even heard of these issues. So there's, specialists that you can try to dig down to at one point. But um, yeah, I think that's what makes healing and talking about healing these particular issues really difficult, is because people look at them as genetic issues, and it's even more reason to drill down into like I can't heal this. This is something that happened to me, and that's coupled with the fact that people with histamine intolerance often get down to a number of safe foods that often include meat. just because it's not triggering an acute reactive response in the body. And, I think it's much like the carnivore
Right.
stuff in that it's, it's fiberless and it's like a band-aid type situation. You don't realize that you're creating a whole mess with that. But anyway, not to, you know, dig into that too much right now, but
Did you try that? Did you try the low carb approach?
well, definitely the low carb approach. So yeah, when I was first sick, and I think I really like had kind of a health mindset for a long time, like since my teens. I think that was birthed from, um, you know, an inappropriate notion to try to control my body and my body image and those types of things, which I think a lot of young women start out like trying to be healthy for that reason,
Okay.
obviously. So that was me for sure. And so I was always eating salads and trying to eat healthy. I think intuitively I did know that it made me feel better too. Um, so yeah, during the time I got sick, I was kind of into paleo, low carb, really low carb for most of my life, most of my like teen to
Right.
adult, young adult life. I spent a year being vegetarian at one point. My partner and I watched Food Inc. and made like a half connection, and it was really strong. But then we just didn't keep the light on, I guess. It's pretty interesting actually. But yeah, so very low carb, paleo style. And when I was first sick, I was getting gut test, yeah, healing mechanisms going on with different naturopathic doctors. And so they had me cut out things that I was, allergic to, given those different tests. And so I removed dairy and eggs because those were the things that were highly allergenic to me. So it was kind of a good starting point, but I definitely would be like really heavy vegetable and grass-fed meat and
Hmm. Hmm.
salmon and things like that. Yeah. So I
And
very much moved away from that over time.
right, right. And like how bad did it get, the situation you had with the POTS, MCAS, EDS? What can you kind of give a picture as to what that looks like, feels like, how it affected your life, etc.?
Yeah. Uh Boy, well it came on in what felt like very suddenly, but after these first couple episodes and it was entangled in what was being diagnosed as chronic sinus infections. So, like, I was having a lot of inflammation, and I went through several rounds of antibiotics and steroids right before all this happened. I was also taking Sudafed for like months every day.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I think it's no coincidence that there was a tipping point after that. But yeah, so in the thick of it, it was really, I felt like I was going to pass out almost every day. There was gray in my peripheral all the time. I felt very, very fatigued. And so all of these things kind of on a scale. I had pretty bad reactions to food, and it felt like everything I ate and everything I did would trigger this long or short flare. It definitely felt like being kind of in a constant flare, whether or
Right.
not you're in
Right.
the bad point or the coming out point. Um,
Did you
yeah, so
make
I
it?
was
Sorry,
no, go ahead.
it sounded well. I was just going to say, did you make the connection that food was playing a role in this, like straight away,
Mhm.
or did it take you some time to make that connection?
Pretty quickly, I noticed that. Particularly alcohol was something that I just had to cut out immediately. It was making me so, so sick, and even just small amounts of alcohol. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, it's funny. I actually was eating avocado and eggs for breakfast every morning, and um, but I had cut out dairy, and so I thought, I was kind of feeling better at first. It was really ironic that my testing was like, these are highly inflammatory, and obviously it's like the worst thing I could possibly be doing,
Right.
or close to it. So yeah, I felt like modes of relief and chapters of relief when I took out different things. Um, but I still felt like I was enthralled in the flares all the time and still very much feeling very uneasy, like not at all like myself. The main things I just couldn't see right. I just felt like I was a totally different person. I felt really kind of disassociated a lot of the time, depersonalized a lot of the time. Um, yeah, I mean, I would just have to lay down in a store and like put my feet up on the wall, things like that. I
Yeah.
did that every day, all day, just to mitigate feeling like I was going to pass out a lot. And then these reactions to food, so I get rashes and really swollen. The chronic fatigue was very bad. Waking up and not being able to get out of bed for a long time, working in bed a lot, and just yeah, everything changed in terms of how I was interacting with the
Yeah.
world.
I think I saw in some of your posts, like up to that point, you were quite focused on your career and things like that, and you were
Hmm.
working a lot.
Yeah.
Was that what your life was like as well?
Yeah. Um, I was definitely focused on career and I was really into media and TV production in college. And I worked in news for a while and that was so stressful.
Mm.
And I also worked in dog rescue in the years around that. And that was also very stressful. Amazing work, but just so emotionally draining. And also wrapped into like toxic productivity with my jobs was also the fact that I could never set boundaries for myself. I was a super people pleaser and this just like rotted away at me, I think. I think in a lot of ways it drove me into chronic illness as being a
Mm.
disruptor to kind of wake up and advocate for myself and find out who I really was.
Right. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
like a wake up call.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and I think a lot of people will say that, that
Mhm.
chronic illness
Sure.
kind of diverted them to become the the people they were meant to be.
What kind of emotion, like emotionally, was it quite a lot of fear going through that? Was it panic, distress? Like
Mhm.
what kind of did you actually go through with all that?
Yeah, so much fear. Just an immediate distrust of yourself and the body too, and that was at least my experience. Very disempowering. I remember the first time I kind of had one of these episodes, I was embarrassed immediately, like to reach out and ask someone for help. And so I think there's a lot of self shame and
Mm,
self hatred of thinking that your body's turning on you. And then
right.
the fear is really intense. But I got over the fear, I think, just residually over time because I always thought I was going to pass out in public or something really bad was going to happen. Sometimes I thought I would die in my sleep. No joke. I just like had
Right.
that level of fear that something was really wrong.
Yeah.
And when you don't die and you just like learn to live with those weird things, then it becomes more manageable. But I did think I always kind of knew that I had the capacity to dig out of it. Like that's my sights were always set on that. Um,
Yeah, something I was talking to my brother's wife yesterday, both of them actually, um, and they're both doctors. And they were talking. I was asking them about people that have like rare conditions and things, and how do they deal with certain conditions. And she was saying that she was talking about a particular patient that had never got over this sense of anger of like, why did this happen to me?
mhm.
Why me? And that
Yeah.
potentially this, like, you're talking about the fear, and I wonder if some people, like, they never get through that or over that, and it makes them stuck. Like they never, learn to deal with it. I wondered, was that something they had to go through as well?
Yeah, huge. You definitely nailed it. I think that's a really tricky thing because I talk a lot about the mindset and getting out of that victim mindset. And it's a fine line between saying that your symptoms aren't real. Like, obviously, um, you have to acknowledge that like what's happening is real to your body, and do yourself due diligence and respecting that reality. But you have to be able to move on from it and be willing to move on from it. And I do think I was really stuck for a long time in that mindset, and very, very sad about it, and very woe is me.
Mm,
And, I know a lot of other people with chronic pain or chronic illness who slip into that. And honestly, it's probably something I can identify that may have been a part of my life even before that. It could have been something that manifested greatly. I think it also manifests because of trauma and food, environment, like everything, But I do think the pain body is what Eckhart Tolle talks about. This kind of
mhm,
this thing on your back that just feeds off the negative energy. And Joe Dispenza sort of talks about that too, that we're kind of addicted to that in some ways and in different ways. So yes, I think there's a huge breaking down process around the mind and letting go of disease labels. And that's really hard to do when you're seeking validation for something you're not getting validation for in conventional medicine or with your social groups. You feel really, really lost. And so it's almost like you're forced to dig into that label, because it gives you identity and empowerment and gives you an explanation
mhm,
for how to
mhm.
navigate things. So
Yeah.
yes, super tricky.
Before we go forward into like your story of what actually happened with your healing journey and changing your diet and trying different things out and all that, um, how would you? I'm guessing you were brought up therefore pretty conventional diet and lifestyle. And where and actually
Mhm.
where do you come from? Are you live? Do you live in the same place you grew up and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I grew up in Oregon in the States, and I've lived three different places in Oregon like since college. So I haven't really lived anywhere else. And I've actually traveled like quite little in my life. So it's an area I'm excited to explore. But yeah, I lived a really standard American childhood. I grew up eating standard American foods. I think in the beginning of my life, there was a little bit more home cooked food. But later on, like as my parents got divorced and things became, more convenient, and there was trauma and just, life happens. And I ate fast food probably almost every day, I think for a decade, probably like in middle school and high school. Um, So yeah, and I always noticed irritation. Like I had digestive issues in high school, and I know it was connected to the food, obviously, but I never really made that connection.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yeah, and I was an active kid and did sports and just really lived the quintessential standard American childhood. But yeah, I think there was some early trauma, later trauma, life trauma, like everyone deals with this on some level, and that kind of stuff. And just our social conditionings in general from when we're young, and all that stuff really shapes us, and I think has a huge role in chronic illness and ultimately finding this lifestyle and healing your child like self and finding that inner peace.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, so let's get back to fast forward to this moment, I guess, where you've been diagnosed with these conditions. And was your did you try other things before you approached making a radical change to your diet, or was it quite quick for you? Or talk about maybe tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, I did try lots of things.
Hmm.
I was like desperate trying lots of things. I kind of fought from the beginning and knew there was kind of natural ways out of this from the beginning. So when I was first seeing naturopaths and getting testing done. There was a lot of inflammation in the gut and no good gut bacteria on the test at all, period.
Wow.
So they really approached it from that standpoint at first. So I went through a lot of gut healing things like,
Mhm.
you know, I can't even remember some of this stuff now, which I think is a good thing. But
Various products or medicines or
products, yeah, products and supplements. So like GI healing
right.
formulas.
Yeah, yeah,
There's one really common glutamine, L-glutamine. I
right,
took
yeah.
that for like a year. It's actually a really controversial supplement. Someone's out there really saying that it causes cancer, which is interesting. But I think, ultimately supplementation to that degree is detrimental. But I did a lot of that.
Sorry,
I
were you doing that? I mean, what was doctor's advice? Because I imagine you might have went to medical doctors first. So were the supplements something you found on your own, or were you recommended that through like
I was
doctors or?
Yeah, well, actually, I saw naturopaths from the beginning.
All right,
So
okay,
I was already really kind of into the natural health
right. I see.
world a bit.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so they were prescribing these things, and I took a lot of supplements for the histamine. We worked on low histamine diet and low histamine foods. And of course, that's kind of relieving in the beginning, but I think it's a bad road to go down. In terms of fruits and vegetables, limiting those foods. I think you want periods where you're abstaining if you have to, but you have to kind of keep these things in rotation, so they don't become more and more intolerant, I think. So a lot of stuff with the diet, which was nice that I wasn't working in conventional medicine mode, and I really never wanted to from the beginning. But the naturopaths sent me to many different specialists. So I saw an eye specialist, and I saw a rheumatologist, and she thought I may have had some like autoimmune lupus type markers, and she's actually the one who recognized my hyper mobility and the connection
Right.
to the gut. um, so lots of different specialists, and ultimately, like, that stuff helped little by little by little, but mostly I think because I was cutting out more and more animal products. So between 2015 and 18, I was sort of on this progressive path towards plant-based eating. And by the end of that, I was really just eating salmon sometimes. I had found fruit, and that was through medical medium. I honestly don't remember the moment, but it was obviously from Instagram and seeing stuff on there. And I read his first book, uh, The Mysteries of Chronic Illness and How to Heal, or something like that. And it's a really beautiful book, that first one. And I know he's pretty controversial, and I was never like a devout follower or anything, but it resonated so deep because he talked about Epstein-Barr virus, and that's one thing I haven't mentioned, but I had that chronic reactivated Epstein-Barr was something that came up in testing. Also, chronic CMV, cytomegalovirus or something. So I had high viral activity in the body, and yeah, his book made a lot of sense. But the fruit fear chapter is what really
Mm,
changed my brain. So I
yeah.
have him to credit for that. So once that happened, I started bringing in more and more fruit, and I just was kind of slowly moving away from any kind of animal products. And then at some point, I found John Stearns, the Mangotarian, and Robert Morris. By a really weird scenario, my partner and I were in an argument about whether or not your pee should be clear, in terms of hydration. And he looked that up and found John Stearns. And so it was really serendipitous that I was looking for answers for healing. And we found this random guy who was doing all this stuff with fruit and healing crazy, fatigue and other
Mhm.
issues. So that's how it all unfolded. And the ethical message really made its way to me at about the same time.
Yeah, I heard about that guy because I went through a period of time of eating mangoes myself,
I remember that.
and so and so a few people had mentioned to me that guy who'd done it for like 6 months or more or something.
Mhm.
But I never met him or anything. I don't know if I was. I think I was in Thailand. I don't know if he was in the same place, um,
Oh, wow.
but yeah. So, uh, did you start to feel a difference straight away, eating more fruit and things like that?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Yeah. That was magical. It was a
Oh
magical
wow.
time. Yeah. I mean, and that's what locked it in so fast for me. I think I had just been, waiting for something like this. I'd been searching for something like this for 3 years really diligently. And so, yeah, it just, when I first read that medical medium chapter, I was kind of hesitant because I was very programmed on low carb. Um, so it was hard at first, but I knew that it made me feel good when I was doing that, and so I became pretty subscribed to it. And then, yeah, when I just kind of jumped into all fruit after we binge watched John's videos, and I just felt so much clarity and relative energy to what I was experiencing with fatigue. And I could tell that my symptoms were just kind of lifting. And I always remember telling my partner that, I'll know when I've really dug deep, when I can kind of see normally again. And it was always hard to explain what that meant to other
Hmm.
people.
Hmm.
But that started to happen like 2 or 3 months in, and I could feel it happening more and more. And I wasn't getting these breakouts anymore. And I just felt so spiritually elated and connected. And I just knew that that was it.
Amazing. Give me
So,
one moment. I'm gonna turn the light
yeah,
on.
sure. How late is it there?
10:30.
Oh, you're staying up late now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I obviously people are all over the world, so interviewing people whenever it's convenient for them, I suppose.
Thank you.
Um, so yeah, I mean, was that challenging for you to make that shift, to make that change, or like were you pretty happy to just jump straight into it?
I was really happy to jump into it, I think.
Yeah,
The challenges have come sort of later when I've experienced the healing and I feel so much better. And I'm like, I feel like if I put a number on it, it's like 85 to 90% healed. I'm very much a realist about knowing that I
right.
have more work to do. But so that's more of a challenge like in the last year and a half for me, is kind of loosening up the reins a little bit. But in the beginning I was so thirsty for something like that, and it just felt so good that it wasn't hard. I don't remember it being very hard, because I was so in love with it. um, yeah, so I definitely, I think, made some potential mistakes in the beginning. And it's funny to look back on like how you progress and learn about
Hmm.
fruit and, the optimal diet. But I was just doing like organic cold pressed apple juice with wild blueberries and berry smoothies and bananas and watermelon and lots of juicing, and just bootstrapping it with, no kind of like exotic tropical
Sure, sure.
fruit or anything. And
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think people overestimate that kind of stuff. Like you don't really need to have exotic fruits or whatever to make it work. Uh, but um, I'm trying to interested in the timeline here. So from starting to eat more fruit, when when did you start to get results? Do you think, and at what point would you say that you were really starting to see progress? Like just in terms of, I don't know if people appreciate maybe how long it takes. And you say now you're still, you're still in the middle of that to some degree. Um,
Yeah.
but what kind of timeline do you think people should expect that might be in your situation?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a really good question. And I always say I dove into fruit, but really, I had this 3 year transition period to getting into that. And I think that's
Right.
why I was so elated. I really didn't have like too much detox. The detox really settled in that winter, like 6 months in. when things just kind of finally hit. And emotionally too, I went through a lot of emotional detoxification and lots of crying and dealing with old things literally coming out of my body. It's really a crazy process on that front. But yeah, I think that it's usually not super fast, but I had gotten to this point where I really moved animal products out of the body completely, I think, before I jumped into that. So it was ready for the taking. But I
Right.
think for most people, you have to take way more time and transition appropriately and really get like the education down, like if you're not excited about learning about this and you don't feel pulled in and you're not binge watching, YouTube videos and reading lots of books, then there might be something missing and you might not be quite ready. And just I think trying to get to a plant-based diet is the most important thing first. And that, yeah, it obviously takes people years to master this and get it down. And I think healing is not at all overnight, but I did experience rapid healing in the first 3 months on fruit. And I did really like probably 95% fruit for the first 3 months that I found out about this. And then I kind of leveled out a bit more with greens and stuff. So I think my story is kind of unique in that way, but it has the context of the fact that I had kind of worked up to that, and I did go hard. But
You,
yeah, I
you were kind of
there's
fruitarian at first, like just fruits for a while. Is that
yeah,
what you were saying?
yeah, yeah. Like I would do those berry smoothies and eat fruit, and then I would have dried figs and dates and stuff like that. So I would have avocado and tomato and some lettuce meals, but it wasn't as often. Like I was making quite a point to do fruit, high fruit.
And at that point,
Um,
were you had you were you back at work? Like, had you always worked at that point, or like just
yeah, I had actually always worked.
right?
It really worked out nicely for me. When I first got sick, I was laid off and I was on unemployment for a while, and then I found a job working with an old friend who does great ape photography, documentarian stuff, and I was like doing video editing for him out of his home part
That
time.
sounds
So it was,
great.
yeah, it was amazing. It's so cool to look back on that too, and like I was fascinated by watching apes eat fruit. He has
I
all
love
this
that.
amazing footage, yeah, of them eating fruit, and never once did I make the connection, and he hasn't either, which I find
Oh,
fascinating at this point.
I interviewed like a primatologist who's been
Yeah,
studying these animals for 40 years, and they've not made
yeah,
that connection. It's so funny talking to them because I remember saying, "Well, see the fruits that they eat. Could we eat them?" And she's like, "No, no, no, we could never eat them." And I was like, "Okay." And then later on, I was like, "So what fruits do they eat?" And she goes, "Oh, they eat these really delicious figs." I'm like, "What?" Like she's got a total disconnection, like saying two totally different things.
yeah,
I'm like, what? I don't understand this, you know.
yeah,
But it's funny because then I was saying, well, when we were evolving, were we eating fruit? And she was like, well, we were doing a whole bunch of things. We were eating stuff in the forest and all that. I'm like, but what? There's a weird disconnect there, even with people,
yeah.
yeah, that study these animals.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
love watching that footage.
Me too.
I do think.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question about that specifically. So, with that kind of documentary, are they looking for the kind of the action footage of the hunting and the like? I'd love to see the fruit eating, but I think most people want to see like the fighting and the hunting and all this.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. He actually it's really centered around saving great apes. So it's really centered
All right,
around sanctuary work. Yeah. So he would go to lots of different sanctuaries and, spend time in the Congo and Rwanda with the gorillas. So yeah, he featured gorillas, orangutans, bonobos, and
amazing.
chimps, and just Yeah,
I'd love
featured
to do
like people
I'd love to do
saving it.
like a tour or a retreat to these places. Like, I don't know if these
Yes,
charities would be up for that, but like we bring 20 people and everyone will pay towards the charity or whatever. I think that'd be
that's a
so
really
cool.
great idea. I love that. What a connection for the fruitarians to make.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I love but it is quite hard to actually find footage and pictures of apes eating fruit. It's almost like it's just not interesting. So
Mhm.
they just kind of cast it aside. It's so funny.
Yeah. Yeah, he had great footage of baby orangutans eating mangoes, and it's the best. It's the
Oh
best.
wow.
Yeah.
There's a great piece of footage recently. It was a monkey eating a banana, right? So it very carefully peeled the banana, and
I
then it
saw
very carefully, you know, the little strings. It took every
Yeah.
one of the strings off one at a time,
Yeah.
and and people were watching it, and you know, people in the comments were like, "Wow, it's exactly like I do," and you're like, "Yeah, of
Mhm.
course, it's the exact same instinct that comes from the
Mhm.
same evolutionary lineage. Like,
Mhm.
this isn't stuff that we decided to peel a banana that way. Like, that's how we were evolved to do it, you know, or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So funny.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, but so getting back to your story here, so it sounds a little bit like plain sailing. Like, once you found the fruit, got on it, was it pretty much just that was you and it just all worked out, or any other stumbling blocks along the way? And did you find you had to change anything else, or um, try anything else out to help with it, or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was really a honeymoon stage in a really good way. And then I moved to Bend, which is more central Oregon and colder winters. And I just kind of settled into the reality of, fumbling around with making this long term and making it best practice and optimal. So, I think I've had moments with higher fat. I didn't read 80-10-10 actually until this last year, which is amazing. But, I discovered the principles of low fat long
Right.
before that. But I think everyone probably goes through that period where they're learning on their own bodily terms that higher fat or even just mid fat sometimes can be a lot on the body, especially I think from a place of healing was just really apparent. So yeah, I've had to make so many different relative tweaks over the last 3 years, and I still am,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm still very fluid and flexible, and I'm still kind of trying different things at different times. I think with the way the seasons work and, whatever's going on for you locally, it's just kind of fun to do that. And yeah, particularly with healing and knowing that I still have things to heal and I do have relative flares. It's just my life is not at all dominated by that anymore. So
Right.
it's a completely different life to live. But yeah, I have my dips and I have to navigate what may have triggered that without trying to get too attached. The one thing I'll say I think is the number one silent, like just wrecker is stress, subconscious stress.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge. And I work a remote job. It's pretty great in that way that it's, I have the luxury of working from home, but I still have relative stresses with the matrix world. And when that stuff is underlying, then things kind of go awry. And it goes so far beyond diet, So sleep is really, really crucial too, and just managing stress.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell that, foods that would never have triggered me at a certain period of time can potentially trigger me at different times when there's stress or, hormone stuff going on. So,
I think a thing about stress as well is that people are in denial about being in stress and
mhm.
maybe don't even. I think people think that stress means I feel so stressed, but it might not necessarily be as obvious to them as that. Do you think that's
Yeah.
true?
Oh yeah, yeah. And there's some sort of societal defeat in admitting stress, or maybe in this community in particular, like we're all, you know, awake and buzzing with higher consciousness, and like no one wants to admit maybe that stress might still affect them. But the subconscious stress, like the silent stress,
Yeah.
I had an incident happen that I didn't think was really bugging me. And I went out on a walk and it got like a little patch of hives. And I've never had hives, even through mast cell activation syndrome. It just wasn't one of
Mm.
my symptoms. So it just was like, wow, the body is crazy.
Yeah, I often think that like this I get this thing sometimes where I wake up super early out of the blue. Like
Oh
maybe
yeah.
4 in the morning or something, like really
Mhm.
early, and I'm just awake. And and that's kind of a thing for me of going, there's something going on here, like this, whether I consciously know something, like I almost feel it's like there's there's a relationship between your conscious self and your subconscious, and you have to like, it's quite hard to actually uh, understand what's going on there sometimes. And
Yeah.
I think that was a little, these kind of moments for me, things happening that are outside of your normal thing, and that particular for
Yeah.
me, that like all of a sudden getting up in the morning really early, out of the blue, and it just makes me go, there's something going on here that I'm not dealing with, that I'm not
Mhm.
like, so some part of me is not happy and it's just trying to tell me, you know.
Yeah.
um,
I've had that too. I mean, I actually have it happen a lot, especially around the full moon. Not a lot, but like for a while there, it was kind of once a month type thing. And many times when it happens, I'll get up and just write. Like there's something that just needed to come out. And it's like, wow. Yeah.
yeah, I have this thing that I think that it's hard to explain, but I feel like there's the conscious part of your mind and all that, all the conscious stuff, you know, and there's this whole other part of you that, and I, what my belief is, there's the two sides of the brain, there's different ways of looking at this, but there's part of you that that communicates with you consciously and through language and words. There's another part of you that can't communicate with you through language and words because it doesn't have, like, if it is the left hand or the right hand side of the brain, it doesn't have the languaging system there to do that. So
Hmm.
it tries to communicate with you through essentially feeling, maybe emotion, sound,
Hmm.
pictures, images, like all this other stuff. You know what I mean? And I think that's part of what the fascination with art is about as well, and all that kind of stuff. But you know,
Hmm.
people say you met this person and I had a bad feeling about them. Consciously, you didn't know anything bad about them, you didn't hear anything bad about them, and all that. But there is a part of you that's taking in maybe potentially more information, has
Yes.
more awareness, has more experience, has that pattern recognition of how people are, and it's trying to communicate with you saying there's something not right here, or this person
Mhm.
is not, you know, and
Yeah.
consciously you don't have the information. And I think there's that's just an example of, I feel like, how we are trying to negotiate that relationship with all parts of ourselves.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I feel that. Yeah. And I think like to that point, one really cool and sometimes scary thing about moving to the raw food level and fruit too is like I think that that side of you becomes like really open and more clearly communicating, like, everything that you just named, you just felt knowledge, inside you. And it's interesting, like I feel like it's really this resensitizing that happens with us. And I think some people can be scared by it almost, and I credit that phenomenon for, I think, my ability to make the ethical vegan connection, I think. Because get scattered around it a lot for many years before. And it wasn't until fruit, and actually getting those things out of my body that I was able to see it so clearly
Yeah,
for the first time.
a lot of people think that the path that people get towards eating fruit and a raw vegan style lifestyle, a lot of people think that it's a logical progression of I'm doing a standard diet, I then cut out this, I become vegetarian, I then go vegan, I then go plant-based, and it's I find there's just as many people who almost go straight to eating fruit or trying to do juicing or something because sometimes health reasons, sometimes
Hmm.
other reasons. Um, it sounds a bit like yours was kind of a progression, but at the same time you made quite a jump as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I was making vegan recipes. Like, I look back at old posts from my Instagram, and I was like hashtagging vegan, and I wasn't vegan at all. I was probably hashtagging vegan and paleo in the same post, Like, it's funny to me that I lacked that. And I was an animal lover, my whole life.
Mhm.
And I even made that connection for a moment. But I think if you don't cultivate that, and there is something to be said about just the right place at the right time, and your brain being able to really feel it, really feel it. When you're still eating animal products and you're still stuffing down your emotions with alcohol and, whatever other drugs, I just think you can't quite connect. And that's how I personally think about it and what happened.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, not to get into unnecessary territory, but I do think sometimes that connection maybe never happens for people. And I think for the many reasons that people may leave raw veganism or veganism in general, I do think that there's just a nugget that is there that maybe wasn't fully solidified, or maybe it was, but like,
Yeah.
look at the social world of how quickly we can be pulled out of that if we're not surrounded by these ideals and convicted in these ideals. Like, just like when I watch TV, which is pretty rare, we watch a lot of streaming stuff, commercials, like, terrifying brainwashing, and just other people, the normalization of killing animals and the distance that we put between that reality. And we make jokes about it to make it really easy to get back into that territory. And I
Yeah.
just think it's easy to slip into that if you're not
Yeah.
convicted.
And I think that, you know, this idea of eating fruit is funny because Anne Osborne sometimes shares newspaper clippings from 100 years ago and throughout the century of, stories of like this person is eating just fruit, or there's a doctor saying we need to eat more fruit or just live mostly on fruit, or and all this
Mm,
stuff. And it's not, if you look back in the day, it's not looked at like that's a crazy idea. It's almost like, wouldn't it be fantastic to like to live on? It's almost like it's not seen as a weird, like it's such a crazy thing. Um,
mhm,
and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. But I do think, and if you see that now, it's definitely put across like this is crazy, and it might be that the media has changed and everything has to be crazified and like everything has to be
mhm,
turned into a story. But
for sure.
I do think that there's a knowledge that's been lost about how people lived and how people ate and how people, and it's happened mostly over this century. And like there is a guy I saw, I go on TikTok sometimes, and there's a guy saying he was he was he was a nutritionist, right? And he was talking about uh, fruits. Fruit was never been as available to us now as sorry, fruits were never available to people in the past as much as they are now, and we should only eat them in the very short, summer season. And the animals that eat fruit, they do it so that they can put on weight. And he was trying to make this case that like eating fruit is helps makes people put on weight, and like, and I was listening to this going, how is this guy so miseducated? Like, the idea that, firstly, well, I get, but that's everyone, right? A lot of people will listen to that and go, yeah, that makes sense, because they don't
Yeah.
have any awareness of, like, it's only relatively recently that humans haven't lived in the tropics, and a lot of people have never been to the tropics, where fruit is just, and big fruits are growing, like, all over the place, like weeds a lot of
Mhm.
the time. And the other thing is, before obviously sugar and all that came into our diet, I don't think people get how much fruit growing there was historically, and how much orchards there were, and
Mhm.
like how many people were farmers and things were trying to produce fruits and new fruits, um and when he says things like, we wouldn't have had access to fruit apart from in the summer months, he's completely forgetting that people have been storing fruit in various ways
Right.
for thousands of years, like drying
Mhm.
fruits, um yeah, maybe turning them into alcohol, which isn't the best thing, but like essentially drying fruits and freezing them. And that the apple season, for example, because of many generations of people working on apples and different, like trying to get varieties to work in different places and all that, there was an apple season that really went from about June till probably February, you know.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
you've got, like, so the idea that there wasn't fruit available, like, yeah, in a lot of places probably that is the case, but
Sure.
it's yeah, so I don't know. But there's
Yeah.
definitely
Oh,
some kind of disconnect now with all this information.
huge, huge. That's a really good point. Never really thought about that. Like that piece playing into the distance, but
That,
also what's
sorry, but it is one of, sorry, that's, I guess that's what I was getting to. It's that thing of, like, the people that are ex-vegan and all that, who go, like a lot of them get inspired by this,
Mhm.
um, almost like a nationalism thing for white people. I've known some white people that are like, uh, oh yeah, our ancestors wouldn't have done. I'm like, but you already know the information about our ancestors go back millions of years and we're in the tropics and stuff. But some people get into that, the whole, like, hunting
Mhm.
and all that, and yeah, I don't know. I guess I understand. A lot of men, it's this kind of masculine thing as well, and I think eating fruit is like not, maybe not as masculine or whatever as shooting, as like hunting, but
Yep.
um yeah, and there's always, yeah, well, there's always a connection with, like, libido and stuff as well, and all that
Mhm.
stuff. It's but yeah, yeah, um
Yeah.
it's this, and I've made these connections with certain people, that
Mhm.
I've seen things they've went through in their life, and I've seen events happen, and then I see them change, and, like, I know there's more to it, but I don't want to just confront them about it, but yeah, there's a lot more to this, I think, this ex-vegan thing.
I do too. I do too. You're touching on something that I haven't thought about, but it's been made clear, especially like with men, is that masculinity thing. And there's this like weird air of resentment that I feel like you it's there's a passing off of individual responsibility to some level. And so, I honestly think it's a psychological thing of I'm choosing to go back to eating animals now. It's easier for me to say this fucked me up than to admit, maybe some other things that happened or some things that I potentially did that weren't right and drove me to this point. But there is a weird resentment tone with some of these men around like I couldn't build muscle and I lost my sex drive. And it's like, well, I didn't see you doing push-ups. You were eating the fruit diet. Like it's funny. I all of a sudden these people who go carnivore, they're working out all the time, but they weren't working out.
But it's such a weird disconnect, because you know um I've hung out with some of these people, and like, whether it's at Woodstock, and Mike Vlasity's there lifting huge amounts of weight for, and or Doug Graham, who's 70 years old and can lift a lot of weight, and is a bit quite a muscly guy, really. And uh, and I know people that have met these people, but they still say that, like, oh no, it's the fruit diet that did this or that to me. So there's a real disconnect. It's interesting. But you then, I guess, what point did you start to share about this? Maybe talk about your Instagram a little bit, and you've obviously had quite a lot of success with developing an audience who are interested in what you're doing. So how did that all take place?
Yeah, thank you. I really, because I was sharing, I was in the habit of sharing already since I started it. So it was really kind of, navigating the food element the whole time on my Instagram, but I wasn't showing myself and I wasn't really showing up for myself. I think in that time I lost a lot of self-confidence and also navigated the fact that like I didn't ever really prioritize myself in a lot of ways in life. And so I think um I don't know, I just kind of became silent and muted. Writing and, showing up in that way kind of became the default during chronic illness. I had so much to say and um, so much thought around it, but this was like the outlet. And so I think when I found fruit, I just documented that openly, just like I was doing with other things. But I definitely think there was a major tone change. And I can even remember the post that I wrote about it was just very immediately convicted and really tied into ethical veganism as well. And my partner had like been self teaching himself photography before all this, and he was in design school, and um, yeah, so we just we kind of put ourselves together on that front in terms of photography. He was getting really good at it. We would always go out and shoot things like just for fun sometimes. So he started, shooting photography for the Instagram, and I started to get a lot more passionate about fruit and sharing and just like a real strong drive to share the message and spread the message. Um, to my dismay, a lot of people in the chronic illness community who I was like connected to in the earlier years weren't all super down with that. But some were too, and some went that same path of plant-based fruit. So yeah, it's really just been a natural progression of what has ref- it's a reflection of what has happened in terms of healing and passion and feeling alive again, and wanting to share it.
Yeah, and people can follow you there at Rosie Heals
hmm
on Instagram. And do you do YouTube? Anything else that people can follow?
I have a YouTube. It's had a weird plant-based cooked food recipe up for like years. And I'm like, I have a YouTube. I'm going to make YouTube soon. So I am actually planning on making videos at some point soon. Um, but yeah, the Instagram is kind of mostly where it's at. And I have a website with some deeper blogs, and also have a course that I built around like the lessons of raw vegan healing, which is pretty in depth too.
Yeah, I actually watched some of that course. That was that
Oh,
part of the
the
bundle, was it?
bundle,
Yeah,
yes.
right. Yeah, that was excellent. I was watching your course and I was like, this is really the phrase I would use. Like, it was quite intellectual. It was
Oh,
quite I don't say that in a bad way. I don't mean that.
yeah.
What I mean is that it was quite detailed, quite like there's certain people that would really like that, like very in-depth explanation. And the way that you communicate as well on Instagram and all that is there's quite a poetry to how you communicate as well. Like it's almost a little bit cryptic at times as well. Like so,
Sure,
but
yeah.
yeah, but I think that people should definitely check out your course as well. Is there a place they can find that?
Yeah, it's right on the link tree on the Instagram, but it's actually just rosieheals.thinkific.com as well. And you can take a look at all the chapters and all that. And it's $30.
Awesome,
But
awesome.
thank you. Thank you so much, Ronnie.
Were you were in the wood? You were speaking in the Woodstock online event. Are you going? Have you been? Are you speaking? What's the situation with that?
I'm not speaking. I would love to go. There are some logistical issues to where I may not be able to go this year, but I'm kind of hoping that by divine intervention, I'll be able to make the last minute decision to go because I really want to.
Very
Yeah,
cool. Very
I've
cool.
got to go. Are you going?
My intention is to go.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing would be, I guess, governments holding me back or whatever, or
Yeah,
airlines. I
that's a
don't know.
thing.
I'll try. I'll try. I think I might have to go to somewhere like Mexico or something for a couple of weeks beforehand.
Mm,
But I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to do whatever it takes. 'Cause I do love it.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
I've been there the last 8 times or something. So yeah, I can't speak highly enough of it. I try.
yeah.
I do this. One of my best friends, this guy Jim, who I met at Woodstock, and he joins me sometimes for I do this Friday night, like Fruity Friday group, and it's just a hangout basically for people who
Mm-hmm.
are Robins, and sometimes we talk about Woodstock. He always talks about Woodstock, right? Because he loves Woodstock, but he's been into raw food since the 70s and all that, and he says, I've been
Okay,
everywhere, I've been to everything, I've been to all the centers, I've been to all the things, and like this is the best thing. Woodstock is the best.
that's
and,
awesome.
and and we go on about Woodstock to people because we love it, and then people will still be like, oh, but I heard that you need to bring your own sleeping bag or something, and it's like, geez, like is that what's gonna hold you back? We're trying to tell you it's like the best thing ever, and you're telling me like you're not gonna go because of a sleeping bag or something or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, great, excellent. Well,
What's going on with your fruit fest this year?
well, it is going ahead,
Yeah.
and once again, could it be prevented by the government? Maybe, but I think it's less and less likely that that's going to happen now.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, and
Yeah.
but yeah, it will be a little bit smaller than it has been in the last few years. Last year was smaller too, but um, and that's just what's happening. And but looking forward to it. It's when is it? About a month from now.
Okay.
Fruitfest. So if people want to learn about it, fruitfest.co.uk. You can join the announcement list. Um, I've not really promoted it enough in this podcast, so thank you. Thanks for asking about it. But
Right.
yeah, that's essentially, if that goes ahead and goes well, then I go from there to trying to get to Woodstock. That's the plan.
Oh, okay.
So I
Yeah.
might go straight from there to Mexico or something. I'll see. Try and get a plan together to get there.
Um,
It's sad because I know a few people a few people are pulling out from it, or I knew some friends that were going to be working at it in the kitchen and stuff, and they're like, "Oh, I don't think I'm going to go," and all that, and it's uh, it's annoying. But
mm-hmm.
um, I uh, I think a lot of people go to Woodstock and love it, and UK Fruit Fest as well. Like people love you, like, but I'm working at it more, so I don't get to experience it so much. But people love it. It's the best experience, have the greatest time, meet amazing people, all this stuff, really great
Yeah.
people, like super great people. And then and then you speak to them a year or two later and they're like, yeah, I don't think I can make it. And they totally forget the experience. Like they totally forget
Mm-hmm.
how profound it was. And
Yeah.
um I always try and keep reminding myself of how good, good it is.
Yeah.
Like honestly, Kelsey, like there's been times where I'm always like, oh, I wonder why I'm going back to this thing again, and and I show up at the place, and immediately I remember, like immediately there's something so magical about it, and it's a special
Mm-hmm.
place for me. But there's such a vibe, is all I can say.
Yeah, I
Totally
love
love it.
that.
Totally love it.
I
Uh,
feel that. I feel that from the videos. I mean, that was another thing that actually really got me into this path was watching all the Woodstock videos and the
oh,
synergy of
yeah,
that.
I have so much like yeah. So I just when I was getting into starting to get into this, came across some videos and all that. I'd actually just been in New York with an ex-girlfriend and was just a vegetarian at the time, and came back here and never thought I'd go to New York again. Like just kind of thought I didn't really have a reason to go, and then started to come across the raw vegan stuff, and then I started to see that all these people had been at an event in New York about that had happened while I was there,
Mm-hmm.
but I had no awareness of it at the time, and so that kind of caught my attention. Like that's interesting. Something happened in New York. I was just in New York, and then started to get into those videos. And when I saw those videos at the festival, like I don't know if you've seen the ones from the first ever
I
Woodstock,
think
but I was
so.
watching those and like that's amazing. Like this is like paradise on earth. These people are like
Mm-hmm.
it just showed. It felt to me like this is the potential of what this diet is.
Mm-hmm.
That it can actually make people like happier and better and more open with each other and all this
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And I was just fascinated. And I was just like, these are my people. Like, I need to go and I need to go and hang out with these people. So yeah,
That's so
but it's
cool.
so much. I have a lot of emotion connected with a lot of those videos,
I
and
bet.
there's like a song that's used in one of the first videos called "Home" by a band called Edward Sharp and the Magnetic Zeros. Like quite a
Mm-hmm. I
famous
love that
song.
song.
Yeah, yeah, quite a famous song. And that song would just bring it all back for me so much, like the emotions of all that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, yeah, I have a lot of
Wow.
feels for Woodstock.
I bet. Yeah. I have the feels. I feel the feels, but I haven't experienced it. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I can
No,
feel it.
it's yeah. I'm totally biased. I love it, So and I always try and I think I'm a very pure like promoter of it because I don't make any money there. I don't get a free ticket.
Mm-hmm.
I don't speak at it, and I don't get any advantage really from being there apart from enjoying
Yeah.
it as an event. So it's cool. Um,
Yeah.
so let me ask you about. I think you say you have quite a flexible approach, and what would typical day be for you? Like, how do you, for people that are maybe starting off doing this, like, how do you actually do this? How do you do this lifestyle?
Mm-hmm.
If you have days where you're more raw than others, what does that look like? What do other days look like? Do you want to give some sort of basic advice for people that are starting off?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the most important kind of rules to have, if you're to that point where you're working fruit in and you're to the high level of fruit, which I think, like we said, takes time, and you want to definitely be plant-based first and find your footing with that. I think starting out the day with a big fruit meal is really important. I do that, like 90% of the time in the last 3 years. There's sometimes where I start like with a celery juice or a green juice or something, but it's much more rare. Um, and so having a big fruit breakfast and then potentially having another big fruit meal for lunch. And I think grounding and having a nice big salad for dinner, um, that's kind of like a good model, I think, to stick to. But it can look different for people. And, if you like to get more involved with special recipes and stuff like that, I think that's also the time for the dinner meal, the grounding, satiating meal. Um, yeah, so lately I've been eating a lot of watermelon, a lot of berries. I've been called to berries lately since it's been so hot here, and it's getting to be like 106 or 7 this week, and we don't have
Wow.
AC.
Yeah.
So I've been super called to the water rich foods, and eating a lot of grapes. Yeah, but I also always will have greens or salad at night, but then I'll go through periods where I'm just having fruit days. It's actually been a little while since I've done that,
Mhm,
but in the
mhm.
last few days I've been doing higher fruit. Yeah, so I think like getting a lot of fruit in early in the day, I think food combining rules are important and real, and you'll come to know that, you know. But yeah, I think an 80-10-10 approach is really good. I'm the type of person who likes to have like a couple fruit days and then maybe like a mid-level fat day. I do feel best when I keep the fat low, but I just kind of enjoy
Sure.
that a little bit more, like going for the full avocado. And for me, I'm like 4'10" and 3/4 and like 95 pounds or so. So like a whole avocado can be kind of higher fat
Sure,
sometimes,
sure.
depending on what else I'm eating.
Did
But
you
I'm not one to save an avocado, half
did
half an
you
avocado.
yeah, did you ever have to count calories or anything? Did you ever, like, have to work that out, or were you eating have you always just instinctively done it? How does that work for you?
It was definitely instinctive, but I realize now at first, I was probably under eating because you just don't understand the full volume change that you have to go through. And I think it takes some time for the stomach to adjust to that too. So yeah, I will pop into Chronometer sometimes and put things in. I think I'm usually like between 15 and 2000 calories, and it's usually on the higher end, but it's really give or take, and it's really depending on what my body's telling me and, potential like relative symptoms coming up and that kind of thing. I do value digestive rest and, short, like cautious periods of digestive rest. And so I do sometimes work a lot of juicing into my day if I feel like that's helpful. But I think most people will need to focus on eating more because that's just like the natural thing when you move towards this diet. We come from this society of portion control and these high fat meals that are like small and it's a whole new thing. It's a whole new thing. I mean, I eat like when I eat in front of other people, um, it's like a show, like people who don't eat this way. They're
Yeah.
like, oh my God, you're eating so much.
How do you deal with that, social things and all that? Did you was that quite an adjustment for you? Were you always a bit different? Like, how did that work out?
It wasn't a huge adjustment because I
Sure.
think I just had so much confidence around it. And the vegan thing too, like it just gives you some agency. I had agency around it and I had confidence around it. And, I wanted to tell everyone else about it too. And that kind of diminishes and changes over time. You realize like how to show up in that way with your message
Sure.
because of how people react. But yeah,
Was that
I
surprising how sensitive people are about food?
very, yeah, very surprising, still very surprising to
Mm,
me, but not so much when you break it down and look at why, it's really one big defense mechanism and on very different levels for different people, but it's very interesting. Yeah, and
yeah,
I can
absolutely.
I can see why that is. Um yeah, but no, I can see why the social aspect can be hard for some people. And I do talk about that in the course a little bit, how there may be potential things that you need to kind of do or reroute in your life to make that aspect easier or different. I don't think everyone just needs to get rid of their friends, but I think what a lot of people say is that organically you kind of drift into new interests, new hobbies, new crowd. And it can be hard to fit in with old people. So, we still hang out with old friends and family, of course, and that can be draining just for the fact that you can't fully be your full self in front
Yeah,
of people.
I have got to a point, I think, where you know, people around me probably know I have a different diet and things like that, and maybe they think I understand some things about nutrition, but maybe they don't. I'm not sure. But
Hmm.
what I'm getting to a point of is when sometimes people will start to talk about diet, or they're starting to do something, or like, and I do know a lot about these things, but I choose just to say nothing unless someone asks me directly a question. I
Yeah.
don't intervene anymore. I just stay out of. I don't try and
Yeah.
jump into someone's conversation and say, "Well, hey, you can do this or you can do that." Like,
Hmm.
I I've just realized that that's that you should only really do that for people that are specifically asking for your help or guidance and all that kind of
Hmm. You should never should on someone.
stuff.
I heard that once. Stop shooting on me. Of course, I've heard that because I went through exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm kind of in that space now too, where I really won't engage unless someone is asking, except with people like my mom and dad, who I still I still exercise that kind of no filter talk. Sometimes I've really backed off, but yeah, in terms of health issues, it kind of becomes a boundary thing where you're like, either stop complaining about that health issue or listen to me talk. um yeah, but I think people have to ask for help, people have to find it
Mm,
themselves, and you can kind of tell when someone is genuinely interested or when someone's trying to like get to the point of trolling you from the beginning.
yeah, yeah, um, absolutely. So, well, it's been fascinating speaking to you and learning
Me
all this
too.
stuff, and I think you're going to give a lot of hope for a lot of people, hopefully, that can listen to this. And if anyone's listening or watching this, and this might help someone, please share it with them. And you know, and to our point, not all the time will we personally be able to help someone, but someone else's story or journey will help them. That is
Hmm.
maybe more relevant to them, and you've got a story that might be very relevant to certain people. So
Sure.
that's excellent. Um,
Thank you.
Before we finish off, then just remind us, like, so at Rosie Heals on Instagram,
Hmm.
YouTube, and where else? And also, do you offer any other help for people? Do you do any coaching or anything like that, or have any intention to do anything in the future? Do you want to let us know what you're thinking of doing?
Yeah, thanks. Rosieheals.com is the website, where there's some blogs that kind of dive into the histamine stuff more, and chronic fatigue and EBV, Epstein-Barr virus. Um, I do have the course out, which I think is a pretty holistic look at things. And I plan on doing more types of courses like that, maybe smaller versions and something kind of condensed around the histamine MCAS thing, because a lot of people ask about it, and I'd like to, yeah, do a little bit more on that front. But really, I do try to put, pack it into the posts sometimes, and yeah, I plan to do more in terms of offerings, but it's still kind of being formulated.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for watching, for listening. Feel free to comment, message us by email, info@fruitfest.co.uk. Go to fruitfest.co.uk, join the newsletter to get more notifications about these interviews. You can follow these on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, other podcast places. Search for Love Fruit Podcast. Please feel free to share this with others you think it might help. We really appreciate that. If you can give it a rating or something, that would be nice as well. And feel free to stay in touch with us. Um, Kelsey, last words of wisdom before we finish.
Yeah, go slow when you're kind of working your way into this lifestyle. And I think the biggest thing too is just having self-love and interrogating maybe where you're falling short on that front. Um, And things like meditation and mindfulness are huge, huge components of that too, which we didn't really touch on. But yeah, I think just being there for yourself, being forgiving, and being fluid is really important as you take it on.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining me, Kelsey.
Thank
And
you so
thanks.
much.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for listening and watching. And we'll see you in another episode of the Love Fruit podcast.